Ya, ¿no? Opa. ¿Empiezo o me tenéis que dar una señal? Okay. Okay, we start. Good evening and welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Modern Human Encounter series organized by the Crosstalks platform in Amsterdam and the Kai Theater in Brussels. This series of encounters or conversations began a few days ago on March 29 at Form and Frame in Amsterdam, continues today here in Madrid at La Casa Encendida, and then continues on in June the 7th at the Rosendal Theater in Trondheim in Norway, ending on October the 14th at the Kai Theater in Brussels. Oh, thank you. For this session, we have invited the three participants here, thank you, to reflect on the major or minor condition of what is human in relation to the rest. That is, what is not human, basically. So in one way or another, we seek to offer firm and individual positions so that through the meeting that involves entering into conversation, we find a sort of common ground, if possible. That's our goal. Our three guests here have received the same question or statement to prepare their responses from their respective and active positions in the here and now. These three women are currently engaged in what we call the less than human condition, and this is what they will talk about today. The title of this encounter, Less Than Human, aims to question the possible minor condition of humanity in the assemblage of living and inert beings with whom we humans cohabit. Whilst the series proposes to consider forms of life and knowledge outside the classical human condition, we wonder how to add by subtracting, that is, through certain renunciations rather than through the acquisitions of new or extra skills. Hence, we propose the less than human statement. The three guests invited to this encounter have a long trajectory in this regard and hold active concerns on this subject in their current projects, which can be summed up in the general proposal of descentralizing the classical Western human condition to the limits. First, Victoria Pérez Royo, thank you for coming and joining us. We'll talk. She currently investigates other affectivities, focusing her gaze on what she calls the anachronistic body, the one moved by rites such as, let's say, magic, mesmerism, telepathy, among others, and for example, or by any ritual modality that counteracts the hegemonic modern-colonial corporality. Then Paz Rojo will continue. Thank you, Paz. She works on the remains of the exhausted bodies after what she calls the decline of neoliberal choreography, proposing concrete operations of resubjectification through body movement. And then we have Amanda Piña. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us. Her work revolves around the decolonization of choreography, introducing what she calls endangered human movements at many levels: oral knowledge, shamanism, diplomatic rituals, or plant wisdom, among others. So thank you, the three of you, and I hope you like it. They will be very challenging.
Okay, so I'm the one starting. So thank you very much, Fernando and Diana, for this invitation, and thank you very much also, Begoña, for hosting us, and thank you, everyone here coming. I'm very, very happy to share my research in this frame, also together with these two wonderful women here. So I'll start. I walk into a house and I know whether it is empty or occupied. I feel the lingering charge in the air of a recent fight or lovemaking or depression. I sense the emotions someone near is emitting, whether friendly or threatening, hate or fear. The more intense the emotion, the greater my reception of it. I feel a tingling on my skin when someone is staring at me or thinking about me. I can tell how others feel by the way they smell. where others are by the air pressure on my skin. Often I sense the direction of and my distance from people or objects in the dark, or with my eyes closed without looking. It must be a vestige of a proximity sense, a sixth sense that's lain dormant from long ago times. These are the words by the Chicano writer Gloria Anzaldúa in her book Borderlands. With these words, she refers to certain experiences that she has had and abilities and the difficulties that she had recognizing them, because as Mexican, she learned to be a body within an altered modern culture. But as a student later on in the USA, she learned also to mistrust this corporeality. I quote her again. Like many Indians and Mexicans, I did not deem my psychic experiences real. I denied their occurrences and let my inner senses atrophy. I allowed white rationality to tell me that the existence of the other worlds was mere pagan superstition. So I think that these experiences are rejecting according to the modern colonial corporeal episteme, which is responsible for imposing globally a racialized hierarchy of bodies. As the Mexican anthropologist Roger Bartra explains, Europe has consistently created its identity based on a mirroring operation, which works in this way. From the Greek origins, the Western world always created a barbarian, always created an other onto which we project negative qualities like savagery, irrationality, brutality, and in relation to which we ourselves in a mirror see ourselves as its opposites, with the positive contrary qualities like civilized, rational, etc. So the original mirroring logic this original mirroring logic that goes back to Greek times, as according to Bartra, found a great impulse in the frame of the conquest of the territories of Abya Yala of Latin America. And then we could project all previous lacks of the savage order that we have been already for centuries creating into whole new populations, thereby creating racial hierarchy between bodies. No? The racial others are brutes, are less than human, and in relation to them, we see ourselves as human, as the true human. No? But as the French poet and politician Aimé Césaire warned us in his discourse on colonialism, colonization dehumanizes not only subjugated peoples, but also the colonizers themselves, in a boomerang effect, as he calls it. Now I quote him. The colonizer, who in order to ease his conscience gets into the habit of seeing the other man as an animal, accustoms himself of treating him like an animal, and then tends objectively to transform himself into an animal. So this dehumanizing process does not only happen, of course, then in the colonies, but it's logically transported also into the metropolis, meaning that, in fact, as Susan Buck-Morss explained, Europe could not ignore the wonderfully productive economy founded on slavery that was created there in the colonies, and took then the plantation as an economic model for the modernization of Europe. She suggests and very clearly shows that there is a clear continuity and coherence between the exploitation in Haitian plantations and the sewing factories in Manchester. There is a continuity, even if the laborers were not considered slaves, but free workers, but it was just because in that particular moment, the color of the skin was crucial in order to be considered a slave or not the conditions of work. So this exploitation of bodies, as we know, in such a great scale is characteristic of capitalism. And now I quote the super well-known Silvia Federici, but she's still a wonderful reference. So she says, the first machine developed by capitalism was not the human body. So the first machine developed by capitalism was the human body and not the steam engine nor the clock. So to transform, as she explains, to transform bodies into machines, this disciplining of the body involved necessarily transforming their individual powers into labor power. As I interpret it, these individual powers were, of course, not muscular force, but middle-aged forms of sympathy, forms of nearness, resemblance, similitude in micro and macro scale, forms of imagination connecting individuals and beings, mineral, animals, vegetals, no? In systems of logic that then were branded as superstitious, as irrational, in order to punish and eradicate them, as we know. So workers in the beginning of capitalism started to understand that their capital, their main property, is their labor power, and understanding then that produces an alienation from their bodies, seen mainly as a capital. No? This process, as we know, has only continued and exacerbated also in the last developments of cognitive, immaterial, affective capitalism, as we want to name it, that does not only use labor power of subjects, but also capitalizes on abilities such as communication, language, and empathy. So in these later developments of capitalism, together with violent forms of dehumanizing bodies and people, not just by active aggression, but by operations of withdrawal from protection, and also in conditions of increasing precarization with dehumanizing logics that operate now in a planetary scale and not just in the colonies. They all converge into what the Cameroonian philosopher Achille Mbembe calls the becoming black of the world, which is the universalization of the black condition, the universalization of a condition of being less than human. But then now let's go back to Gloria Anzaldúa and to her facultad, to her ability, this dormant sixth sense with which I have started talking today. And these abilities that she has, that she explained, they are not abilities that she actively fostered. They are not exotic skills that she was practicing in order to gain them and as an adorn to her body. And so they appeared as a real necessity and not on a whim. So actually this, as she explains it, this ability, la facultad, it is a matter of vulnerability. And again, in her words, she says, when we are up against the wall, when we have all sorts of oppressions coming at us, we are forced to develop this faculty. It's a kind of survival tactic that people unknowingly cultivate. So this is the frame from which I would like to approach. This is the frame I wanted to set up at the beginning, and from this frame I would like to approach some recent performing arts works and practices that I have been very interested in the last years. I do not, of course, I would like to let it clear, I do not intend to explain these works or to explain their meaning or to exhaust their possibilities or to translate the intention of the artist or anything of the kind. I am just opening a frame, the less than human corporealities, from which I would like to tackle one of the many dimensions that these pieces have, or that these practices and pieces have. No? So And in this frame, I understand that all these practices and works are ones in which bodies rebel, in which imagination and fiction are great tools for rebelling, so they are great tools to face the fascism of realism, this odious, it is what it is, no? To face an oppressive and reified reality, no? To open constricted and limited bodies. I think these are practices that now actively foster and try to and find. They are practices that dream of new corporealities, that rehearse, try and practice dissident corporealities to these hegemonic and disempowered ones. I will just now mention some of the many, and I will organize them in 3 or 4 common strategies, depending on the time I'm taking. I didn't look at the hour. Well, you tell me. So the first strategy is related to expanding perception, like arriving to something like extrasensorial or extrasensory perception. One piece, well, the first piece I would like to talk about is called Hands, a telepathic piece in 2020 by Alina Follini, Letizia Scricri, and Luciana Chieregatti. Hands was a piece that was presented live in Latin America and Europe, but in 2020, in times of pandemic, when each of them were confined in different countries, in Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Brazil, I don't know. They decided to make it telepathically. And I received my invitation to participate via email. Now I read some fragments. As a warming up, they just proposed that we could start with our hands, watching them, rubbing, caressing, kneading them, not pinching. And in the beginning, when the moment started, they said, you can imagine us dancing, dance yourself, connect with the rest of the audience, who will also be telepathing with us, visualize and inhabit a place, a light, a color, a temperature, a texture of space. I had a powerful experience. I must say that at the beginning, I actively evoked images I remembered from the piece and from the process I had the opportunity to see. But shortly after, and without foreseeing it, my mind was flooded by many other images and many other sensations that I didn't know I remembered, and that appeared unexpectedly charged with affects, and that revealed ways and attitudes of Alina and Lou that I wasn't conscious about before and that were now splendid appearing before me. No? Second case is Carolina Mendonça, the Brazilian artist living in Brussels. And I had the opportunity of participating in a workshop by her in Uruguay in 2018, in which she was sharing her work on listening to traces of history and with the figure of mermaids and the siren. And then one morning we focused just on the ability of listening, and of course we developed many practices like massaging the ears for a while, for a long time actually, letting that the ear creates, letting images, textures, things like coming out of this massage and other things. And then we went out to the fields as a great collective ear, trying to pay attention to every sound, including what we clearly see, what we clearly hear, what we barely hear, like motors in the distance or conversations far away that the wind brings near. What we do not recognize with clarity, sounds that we cannot assign to someone or to something, it's like rumors, And also, she invited us to hear what we do not literally hear, but almost imagine. And then I, for example, started imagining the growth of the roots of the trees and the growth of the leaves of the trees. And the experiences were diverse and extended far beyond usual auditions. Our senses were opened to listen to what wasn't heard before, what one doesn't know that one hears, and what for our body was previously inaudible. So the practice opened a great feeling which perception was deeply entangled with imagination. It is always, we know it is always so, but in a much more radical way. And then it is interesting in our Western bodies in which perception is reduced usually to name what we can recognize and to empirical perception. To be able to start listening to unnameable and unidentifiable sounds that unsettle the ear was a very interesting perception. Wow, this is this would be one first strategy. The second strategy to think about those issues would be the strategy of fictionalizing the body. First practice, I was also very impressed, was Anne Uren, the French choreographer living in Vienna. That she has developed a very, very long-term research called Phantasmical Anatomies. Part of it was also her PhD. In the piece, we as audience are invited to lay down in mattresses or yoga mats and listen to her discourse, to her indications. No? She starts with a routine based on Feldenkrais, then fostering awareness of the body, inviting us to focus on an organ or a particular part of the body, isolating it, observing how it is now, how it functions, and gradually she introduces fantastic elements, no? Like, for example, the tongue finds her way out of the mouth, starts licking the face, licks the body, the feet goes out, and then starts creeping up the walls and searching the corners of the ceiling. Or, for example, she develops images of organs massaging hands, like the liver. I remember how the liver was massaging my hands, or how my hands were massaging the insides of the stomach, or imaginations of, after feeling the weight of my body on the floor, observing the layers down this floor and continuing deep down, going through rocks, going through marine sediments of past geological times until we can feel the seismic activity of the earth, no? Those kind of. Esther Rodríguez Barbero is another artist, Spanish artist, and in her installation, she did an installation called Do Bodies Dream of Electromagnetic Organs that was presented in 2021 in Ars Electronica in Linz. And this piece departs from her personal experience with an automatic cardioverter defibrillator that she has implanted in her heart. Of course, this is the technology we usually talk about when we talk about technology, but also with other technologies that she has been developing over the years, relating to modes of perception, meditation, and relation to space in her yoga and in her choreographic practice, in which she has focused and worked with her body as sender and recipient of fluxes, impressions, and matter that we are not usually aware of. Departing from this research, some months later, last December in La Caldera, with a group of people, she continued also working with these issues, and she invited us at some point to imagine organs that we would like to develop, that we would like to have in the future. And these new organs that we worked with were fabulous. Like, I remember people telling me about long, movable hairs all over the body that could caress the space around, or a skin that can taste the surfaces it touches, eyes and antennae in the back and sides of the body, sensor of emotions in the fingers, like those things, not thousands new fantastic organs. And I think that both Anne and Esther fictions, even when they are embodied and sustained over time, of course, will not evolve into creating new organs like this, but they allow to open our perception and to discover powers that were hidden, but that we had but did not recognize, as for example happens with dowsers, no? In Spanish, tauríes, no? That can develop a sensitivity towards radiesthesia once you start. No? It's possible to feel it, no? And then I quote Esther in a recent interview. She said that these technologies, I add corporeal or not, no? Let us recognize that the body can do some things that it has forgotten, but that are still there, and technologies is just a way to make them visible. Well, third strategy would be something like hallucinations and visions. First case is the beginning of a research project that Sofia Asencio, also another Spanish artist, presented now in last December in Nido in Uruguay, that she's starting to work with, and consists of an attempt to create a community of dreamers. It is in the very, very beginning, maybe I shouldn't be talking about it, but it was so fantastic and so interesting, and I think, well, at that moment, in this particular occasion, she proposed a series of routines that we try out 2 nights. And then we had different routines to do the night before going to sleep, an image that we all share, among other things. And the proposal, of course, develops in sleep. We should share the same territory in our dreams. This is the principle. No? And the morning after, we put it in common by creating together landscape, no? The landscape or the space that we have inhabited during the nights. The idea, I think, that is underlying this desire and this project is liberating dreams from their reduction of an understanding as mere symptoms of individual pathologies or mental disorders, no? Liberating them from their reduction to the sheer adjustment and regulation of our experiences when we are awake, and then trying, the idea is, I think, to try to open their possibilities for trans-individual signification. I think it's a way of liberating dreams from their discredit and marginalized position in a world dominated by empirical perception and abstract rational thinking, and open dreams to new prophetic and visionary shared possibilities. Another case would be Mónica Valenciano, also a Spanish dancer, choreographer, with her Baile por Fantasmas, which is, I couldn't find a good translation, so a particular way of dancing among... Yeah, but not only, but well, specters. So I think it's another case of research in which visions, collective imaginaries, and mental images is fundamental. No? I will not refer to any particular piece, but rather to her decades-long research on fabricating a body that is conceived as a medium, as a recipient and trigger of all kinds of images that she has developed consistently over the years. And then she has achieved, I think it's a wonderful extreme openness that allow her body to capture for moments, not to make visible, even for a matter of seconds, images, specters, ghosts that haunt us as individuals and also as society. No? The ghosts also of maybe also people that we miss, that for brief moments are able to find expression and to live a vicarious life in another body. No? In Monica's body surface. Maybe a quote by Italo Calvino offers a good insight about these two pieces, and also about the whole less than human condition and strategies of survival. He says, civilization is at the brink of losing a fundamental human capacity, which is the ability to look at visual images with closed eyes. There was a fourth strategy in which the main source of inspiration was Amanda's work. So I think I will not talk a lot about it, but it has been a source of inspiration and also for engaging with many other people in their research, which is a strategy based in recovering, reinventing, fabricating, alter modern corporealities that might be concealed in popular indigenous dances that have been able to survive until today, which now your project is Endangered Human Movement. So I will not say a lot. Well, I don't know, how am I about the 20 minutes? Well, just then a couple of words, but I don't know. Are you? Okay. I don't want to take, it's just, so I think it's not just, well, I think the underlying idea in these practices and helping, well, many other people that I have, that are, especially in Latin America also, because I have had the opportunity of traveling a lot in there in the last years. And I see that there are lots of people working with popular dances. And I think it can be read in many different respects, but one of the readings or one of the interpretations I find in there is that there is a suspicion, there is a hope that in these dances, in spite of their illegitimate uses as they have been used for creating false national identities, for fostering tourism, etc. But under there, if they were able to survive, there is a core maybe of rhythms, structures, forms, who knows, in which it is maybe possible to discover alternative corporealities that have a value as a possible archive for providing possibilities of achieving other corporeal states in which we can develop dissident corporealities as the ones that create new alliances with the people and with other beings around. So I will not talk a lot because probably you are the most. But just as a brief summary of a couple of ideas. So all these pieces and practices in this frame of interpretation that I propose could be seen as attempts to shake off the modern colonial corporealities and to generate other faculties, to liberate our bodies from capitalization of its capacity, to liberate it from capitalization of its abilities and potencies, from a reduction that limits its perception to the nameable and clearly recognizable, that relegates to the status of the inexistent these realities that have yet no name, that neutralizes imagination as a tool for collective survival. I think they try to connect with others, to create alliances with other human and non-human entities, trusting the capacities of the bodies fostered among many others by trusting the capacities of the body also fostered by imagination and fiction in order to feel less alone and less isolated and in good company. So these are pieces of research and creation that, departing from anxieties of bodies considered less than human, rehearse and devise more than human corporealities, extra corporealities. So I found a beautiful quote by Clarice Lispector in Agua Viva, as in every occasion I have to speak about my issues, about my research. The translation is not so good, but well, I use it to finish. She says, "To interpret and shape myself, I need new signs and new articulations in forms which are found both on this side of my human history and on the other. In Spanish it sounds better because it refers better to the less than human and more than human. She says, para interpretarme y formularme necesito nuevas señales y articulaciones nuevas en formas que se localicen más acá y más allá de mi historia humana. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. And thank you, Fernando and Diana, for organizing this. Also to Begoña for hosting. I'm also very glad and happy to be with you too. So I have prepared a short presentation trying to speculate on what a dance being less than human could be. And as a first thing I want to say is that probably it has something to do with learning to die well. Learning to die well, to die well is the title of a research I'm just beginning. But it's also a paradigm I'm borrowing from Italian philosopher Federico Campagna and his book, Prophetic Culture, Recreation for Adolescents. And in this book, Federico argues that if modernity has, in a way, taught us to live well, probably the time has arrived to learn how to die well. So from where to create the conditions of happiness in the current extinction of the future, so that it can constitute, and this is very important, a fertile ruin for those who will survive us. This dying well thing also comes from a personal experience of exhaustion in the context of the pandemic, and the feeling or the sense that a kind of world, or this world, is kind of being exhausted, right? So there is some kind of exhaustion of time, but also exhaustion of the body. On the other side of the pandemic threshold, we have entered exhaustion. This is a sentence from another Italian philosopher, Franco Berardi Bifo, and his book, The Third Unconscious. So there has been a kind of energetic recession. Physical and nervous energy has diminished. A kind of downward trend also that brings, this is the opportunity we have, the opportunity to reconfigure the concept of the future, not linked to the expansion of the present, or in other words, to the expansion of capitalism. The world has grown old. This is what he says, Berardi Bifo. So the world is closer to death. And what does aging mean? From my own experience, I can say at this very moment that it has to do with a degradation of self-perception. So assuming that the other, that is my body, responds less and less to the expectations I have. So to argue that this world, that this collective narration or this segment of time in which we are living now has grown old implies a sharpening of the awareness of non-identity. Therefore, allowing oneself or assuming a kind of dissolution, assuming and allowing oneself with this kind of onto-epistemic disintegration, let's say, or mutation. So in order to die well, or so to speak, in order to accompany, because this is the question also, how do we want to accompany this onto-epistemic disintegration? We need to understand that our present does not imply the passage towards the future as we know it, as we need it. That perhaps the present is not only contemporary, actually, but that it can be conceived as the past of a future that yet we don't know. It's a future, it will be a future that is not for us, right? So in respect to dance, perhaps time has arrived for white Western dance to conceive itself as a living ruin. So this will mean that probably its leftovers, its remains, however, can maybe constitute a future different than a future useful for us, right? So this involves to conceive arts, the living arts and dance, as the past of a future that won't be anthropocentrically scaled. Therefore, a future that, as Timothy Morton argues, is a future that is unthinkable, actually, because we cannot think about it. So it's a future that it will be absolutely open, strange also, and I will add, bare, is a bare future. And I want to believe that the living arts and dance can come from that future. So for me, it's a question of aesthetics, actually. It's not about ethics, it's not about politics, it's a question of aesthetics. So for a dance being less than human, we need to learn, and this will be my proposal, what dances in itself without transforming it into something useful for us. As some of you know, I have discussed or argued this in the book To Dance in the Age of No Future, but more from the perspective or the semiotics of capitalism. So some of the things that also, Victoria, you mentioned in the beginning, I argue how dance can cease to be a means associated with the consciousness of the dancer, which implies also a withdrawal of dancer's labor from the creative capacities of the dancer, or from the dancer also as understood as a communicative, aesthetic dispositive as well. So by making dance coincide with a body, so whatever body, a gambens, a dance that is not about the body of the dancer as an identity, right? But a dance processing itself as an impersonal and anonymous phenomena. So I'm drawing still from the same, I'm still concerned about the same, actually, and or with the same, and still drawing the same lines of research. But what I'm doing is to moving them, all these questions, into the frame of ecological thinking, as being argued by Timothy Morton, deconstruction, and especially trying to re-articulate some of the 20th century philosophies of the body. And here I'm thinking to keep on working through the concept of potentiality of Agamben, the use of the body, and also, of course, this chiasmatic relationship of Merleau-Ponty between body and the world. So rearticulating some of those philosophies into the mind frame of what is being called speculative realisms or speculative materialisms. And I'm thinking here in object-oriented ontology, the critique of correlacionismo. Yes, thank you.
Correlationism.
Yes. And the notion of contingency as being argued by Quentin Meillassoux. So, could dance be a place for the practice of ways of being and forms of life, not anthropocentrically scaled? Yes, I will say. And maybe the other question, or the potentiality that there is in that kind of approach, is that we can finally reconfigure or keep on reconfiguring notions such necessity, desire, and knowledge in respect to performance, performativity, their publicness also, and of course in regard to artistic research. So, I go back now to this dance conceived as a living ruin, okay? Dance conceived as a living ruin involves the encounter with this onto-epistemic disintegration, if we agree on that. This moment, this time we are living now, actually. So as an encounter, it implies the aesthetic experience of what could be understood a precarious, very precarious ontology of existence. Or in other words, the encounter with the moment that happens at the edge of language. So in applying this idea, we are combining something conceived as the past and something conceived in respect to a future that we don't know. And I like to bring here, just to keep on understanding this idea, the notion of ruin as how it's been argued by Spanish philosopher Santiago Albarrico. In the domain, he describes this in the domain of architecture, but I think it can really help us to understand how it has to do with this not now, actually, not something that is not doesn't exist in regard to the present. So I'm now speaking through his words, okay? Through the ruin, we recover the sad objectivity of things. Those things visibly arrested and expelled, those things that appear as waste, right? These things, Santiago Albarrico says, are the scandal of survival. And what is survival? Survival is called a thing, right? Which these things are always the result of two vital attitudes, such as waiting and attention, right? So through the ruin, we hardly distinguish between the house, the piece, the dance that has been destroyed, and the house, the piece, the dance yet to be built. What the ruin does is to put matter back in the space as a retrospective memory, right? While remanding the very idea of project in its etymology, which is to be launched forward, right? So there are three things that these three conclusions I can take from this. If we think of a dance conceived as a living ruin, what we have is a kind of a spectral futurality. which I will define as a having been which is not yet. Un haber sido que no es todavía. Haber sido que no es todavía. A having been which is not yet. Or that is not yet. So while evoking the quality of having been, this dance is launched towards a future which, however, is awaiting. It's a future that is nevertheless a not now. It's a future that nevertheless is a we are not now. We are not yet. So, and the third thing that I could say is that for this dance then is conceived as a leftover or something that is dissolving, while it also has the power to distribute a kind of X factor, okay? A kind of agency that gets distributed, which is different than us. Is radically different than us. So therefore, this agency, this one thing, this X factor that gets distributed, won't tell anything about who we are, what do we want, what do we perceive. That is out of the question. So I'm doing a practice. Very simple practice that I call haptic transmissions, just to give it a name. And I put it that name because I had to do this, and I was like, well, I'm gonna. But consists in something very ancient, something very old, actually. Very super old. There is nothing new about it, which is it consists on transmitting a thing to someone else's body through the hands or through the body, through touching, right? And then the other person who receives this thing receives it with the eyes closed. And then later on, I mean, there are different scores. This person dances with eyes closed. There remains. There will be also a third element, which regards something you also mentioned in the practice of someone else. Then you can also describe what you see with eyes closed. Okay. So, so it's something very old, and it includes the most ancient episteme, which is the body. And I will say in these transmissions, we include the bodies we are, the bodies we were, and the bodies we are not yet. So there is some kind of eternal loop here. I don't know, I just leave it there. Through these transmissions, dance, this is something that I encountered, and I was very touched by it when I saw it. We are not only, we are not conceiving dance as an ending thing, but actually we are conceiving it as a hope, okay, as the not known future in constant transmission. Because later on, by the way, this that you have received, you give it to someone else, okay? And I will say that it is a speculative approach as regards, as you might have realized, the impossible project to elaborate futurality or a futurality not based on what we know, on something that we know. And here I remember Edith Rugov's sentence or statement in regard to artistic research. And she used to say artistic research in regard to knowledge and all that, how to has to do with how to know that which we don't know how to know. So here we are applying something similar. Yes, it is. So this is a form of a speculation that works in favor of contingency rather than probability, which has quite a lot of consequences. But one of them, then, I will say that, so these, so to speak, less than human transmissions, these spectral futuralities imply an experience of finitude and contingency, understood as the recognition of a dance that is not ours, a dance that we cannot reproduce, a dance that we cannot repeat at will, okay? It is a dance that is not in our hands, yet we are transmitting it through our hands. It is a dance that is not in our hands, but in the hands of a force foreign to us. And I will dare to say, I just provoke a little bit, that if we will be theologians, we will say that is a dance that actually is in the hands of a goddess to come or a god to come, who knows how, and yes. So I think I leave it here. Thank you.
Bueno, qué hermosas presentaciones, qué inspiradoras. Quiero agradecer también a los organizadores. And I'm going to continue in English, just to, taste my mother language here in Madrid. So I will talk today about a project, which is a long-term project that somehow happened to enter in my artistic practice through the door of family, through the door of the love to a place, through the door of my mother as my, the person that took care of me when I was a child in a certain place. So in 2013, the place where I grew up in Chile, because I am Mexican and Chilean, but in Chile I grew up in Los Andes Centrales, in the Central Andes. I started to hear from my mother in my community of origin there about a mining project that was going to expand. And I started to feel through the years from 2013 on the discomfort and the fear of my mother about this expansion of this mining project very close to the place I grew up and where her house is and where her friends live. And through thinking with the fears and the concerns of my mother, that somehow, as you might know, umbilical cords disappear, but they don't completely do so. And the concerns of the person that you were connected through this cord become your concerns at a certain point. And the issue of the expansion of this mine, the company is called Anglo-American Mining Corporation, and is one of the fifth more important, biggest mining companies, had to do with the fear that the mining company was warming the glaciers, thus melting them through the dust that they produce, and also affecting the water through the amount of water they use for the processes of cleaning minerals, and also the fear of the contamination, pollution of the water through their residuals, toxic residual. Through thinking with this problem, I decided to devote my mother was very clear, we need to do something, this is something we need to do something about. And I experienced a certain frustration because I do art, so what can I do about this mining corporation, the fifth one in the world, with my artistic capacities? And in which way I can do that or something like art in order to survive the fear, the frustration, and the pain of this de-earthing machine, which is the extraction of minerals in the global south, especially in Chile, which is a mining country. That's what we learn in school. To discover later that Chile actually is a glacier country. But that is another story. But many, many, many glaciers from South America are in the Andes that today happen to be part of the nation state called Chile. So that was the starting point of this travel I will do today through this project. It took me 5 or 6 years to be able to realize the project because, as you know, funding for arts in the Global South is not so available as in the North. So the desire was to rehearse in the different contexts that I had in Europe, a way to relate with that territory and to think from that territory and to somehow manage to find a way in which European funding could support the project if we think that capital comes from the extraction of the earth and of bodies and it flows towards the north. Well, it would be great that some flow goes in the other way to fund projects at the sites of extraction. And so the project is called the School of Mountains and Waters. Oh, yes. And there are many like socio-political issues that inspire the work or that allow the work to think in a way that then it becomes this, what I will present today. One of the issues is water scarcity. The Santiago Valley is in a desertification line. I heard Madrid too. I think here in Madrid you have the advantage not to having mining corporations that are actually melting glaciers, but climate change, capitalocenic change in climatic conditions is drying up the city and the area where I was born, where I grew up. And I grew up in this place, which is a rural place, very close to the Andes. And it is actually, I think, part of a mountain that is called El Cerro El Plomo. Talking about non-human or less than human or more than human, and I love the title less than human encounters. The mountain body whose foothills are the places I used to play as a child. If I understand this body as an extended body of a mountain, it is called Cerro El Plomo in Spanish, but it also has a name in Quechua, which is Apu Huamani. And Apu Huamani is a tutelar mountain. An Apu is not only a mountain, it's not only geology, it's not only tourism or natural resource, it is an earth being. In Quechua is Tiracuna. So in Quechua there is people, and people, earth. And while doing this research on the foothills of this Apu, I started to think through and with other people from Abya Yala that have been trying to translate this notion to understand its potency. Even though Santiago, through colonial times, has become, has named the mountain El Plomo, Plumber Hill, it is really not a hill, but it's a huge mountain. And it was an Apu because it was so big that it actually was clear for the indigenous population of the valley, which was Mapuche and Quechua Aymara. Mapuche as a large concept because there are many different Mapuche groups. It was clear for them that that mountain nourished the city with water, and there was a relationship of reciprocity with the mountain. Very close to the mountain, a smaller mountain, Cerro El Pochoco, was a place where the Mapuche installed the renis, their portals or their ceremonial sites. So 2 ceremonial sites, one from the Inca Empire and one from the Mapuche Empire. In order to make this project, to talk about what was happening in this mountain and why it was important to talk about it, we decided to work with groups of children. This is also the project happens within a very kind of a particular political situation in Chile. We have a constitution that was going to be the first and very important ecological constitution that will give water rights back to the state to take care of, and not as a merchandise, which is today the case, which was installed by dictatorship. And through this failure, there was a very difficult political moment. And we thought that at that moment, after this big social movement have failed, all this energy of revolt and of wanting to change things had been like sort of sedated, yeah, through many different strategies. It was important to work practically and work with different groups of people. So we decided to work with kids first, in order to develop a way of talking about mountains and understanding mountains, and also making research with children in which mountains will not be natural resource, it would not be geology, topography, tourism, and a way in which we would recognize mountains as living bodies, intelligent, knowledgeable, and we would think of the land as a territory that can teach. So instead of thinking a project like site-specific, I'm going to put it there, which is something I also know how to do. The challenge of this work was to think from the bottom up and to think in which way, if we create a school of unlearning, the idea of the human as pre-existent, the idea of the human that is not in reciprocity, that doesn't need to live in relation to those forces and others that sustain our life. And if we want to make a project like that, we have to start with children, and we have to create an ecology of forms of knowing. So inviting people from Western science, geology, hydrology, climate sciences, that can talk about the mountains and their importance, and talk about the current moment and why this company should not be granted permission to operate. And at the same time, to educate in a more subtle way, inviting also indigenous leaders from the Mapuche community and also from Wixárika tradition. I worked many years together with Juan José Ramírez Catira in projects of unlearning. So we started with the kids, and the idea was to do something that in Chile is not done, which is to bring activism to the kids in the sense of do a work in which activists are invited to school kids from like sort of like vulnerable places, are invited to talk and to explain mountains from a different perspective. But then also what was very important in this project was to use a form of knowing that we in the performing arts are very skilled, but that also indigenous people are very, shamans and people of knowledge are very skilled in, which is to know by identification. So we did a work of becoming the mountain. And kids would become the mountain through different means. And through the process of becoming the mountain, they would become also directors of their own film, would become walkers in the mountain areas, would write poems from the perspective of the mountain and the glaciers, and would enter into the perspective of the mountain to then create video pieces in which they really transform visually into mountains. this was important and strategic to articulate the school, to think about the knowledge of becoming as a way of acquiring a sensible form of relation with that which one is becoming to know. So with that, one is becoming to know. So as opposition to science, in which we learn through distance and separation and somehow erasing relations, right? Because the lab, which is very similar to the theater and the museum, by the way, erasing relations in a controlled space. The idea was to know through identification and through being with that one, what one is getting to know. And after the working with the kids, we thought the school had to have an activist part. So we decided to think in which way we could create images of use value that could serve the activist efforts to somehow protect and reshape the way we think about that mountain and those rivers that the mountain nourishes, and to somehow recalibrate the way we encounter them as others. So not to encounter them as stuff, like how we have learned from modern colonial traditions, no? Others that are not human tend to be stuff, if humans also. And how to calibrate this and also create images of use value. For me, it was important to work with my ancestors, direct ancestors, and with this local community against this giant. And to somehow use the body to think with the territory, with the land, to create the second part of the project, which would be the third part of the project, which would be a performative walk in the mountain, in the place which would be the future mine. That is my mother recording. So to arrive to this place where the mine wants to expand, you need to go 1 hour and a half, 1 hour and 20 minutes. We did it in vans from a cultural center in the city of Santiago to the mountains, to the Andes. And we composed a soundtrack for that trip that would already allow the people to arrive in another state. And that soundscape or soundtrack was constructed out of different waters, I called. The waters of memory, the waters of ancient times, the waters of extraction, etc. Okay. But in order to make that soundscape, we needed to create a frame in which to get a knowledge from this rehearsal of an ecology forms of knowing, to get different types and forms of knowledge that would inform this walk. And with that we work with, as I said, geologists, people of different, with different skills, also with activists, local activists, and so on. In an encounter in which we started to look at the future of this valley in relation to water, and started to think about our bodies as bodies of water, but also started to think about mountains as living bodies, and mountains, glaciers, and rivers as living bodies filled with knowledge and with intentionality. In order to somehow do this work in a difficult political moment, we decided to put all information about Anglo-American in the audio, so it would be invisible. Because in Chile, activists have been killed in the past, and they can continue to be killed by the powers that be. So What was very important for me was to think about the territory not as a place in which to land with a certain idea, but try to listen to the ideas, thoughts, and feelings that are already present in the territory. To do that, we worked with Leonel Lienlaf. He is a Mapuche poet who has been recopilated chants, ancestral chants that sing the memory of the waters, the memory of the seeds, the memory of the woods, forests. Leonel is a poet, is a very important Mapuche poet in Chile, but he's also someone who knows how to restore forest, which is not an easy thing. It's not to plant trees, but to restore forest, which is a very specific situated knowledge that has to do with the relation between the trees. And in order to create these choreographies that we would do on this side, which is the side where the mind will expand under the earth, we use these chants and the places that the chants were, choosing to be synced from as points of departure for different sections of dances and ritual invocations of the spirits of water, as they are known by people who can see them, and the spirits of mountains. When I say spirit, it's tricky because in modern colonial, the spirit is always transcendent. So I'm talking about something which is not that, so it's very important to keep in mind this ontological gap between the idea of spirit that we might have inherited from colonial languages and the spirits that the indigenous elders can conjure and talk about in relation to a place in which, for example, the waters decide to rise up and enter in conversation with trees, or a place in which trees decide to call up for waters in order for them to rise. So very, very different world than the world that we inherited as the mining country, where gravity, allows waters to fall down, however they fall. They don't have agency, mountains for sure not, and extraction is positive, of course, because it creates jobs and creates, economic growth, etc. So I would like to show a short trailer about the project, but then I would like to work a bit about this idea of ontological opening and what these other beings that are not human and that are tirakuna or earth beings or people earth can do. Rastrearemos los flujos del agua. Hoy emprenderemos un viaje siguiendo diferentes cursos de agua. Rastrearemos los flujos del agua potable de Santiago hasta sus orígenes. Cavernas y napas subterráneas, contenedores montañosos, capas de sedimentos calcáreos. Nos sumergiremos en diferentes historias para resurgir en otra geografía y en otros tiempos, imaginando juntos el futuro de las aguas en el Valle de Santiago. Este viaje comienza en tiempos inmemoriales. Hoy emprenderemos un viaje siguiendo diferentes cursos de agua. Rastrearemos los flujos del agua potable de Santiago. So the idea of ontological openings I learned from Marisol de la Cadena, and it was very sort of instrumental for this work to sort of allow the difference between an apu, for example, or El Cerro, El Plomo, as a mountain that has to be mined because it has copper inside, which is an important asset in the global trading market. The difference between those two don't need to be reconciled. We don't need to understand the Apo as a god, because it would be a bad translation where it will be only transcendence, where an Apo has a body which is a people's body. A people, earth. So it's not a human body, because actually, and here I wanted to sort of make a comment on the idea of the human. I think the human is the one, so I think the human is white, historically, and it is modern colonial, and it exists through the dehumanization of others, I mean, through those who are lesser than human. And in the decolonial movement, we don't want to be human. We want to be people. We don't think human is something interesting to attain. And in relation to this mountain, it is people, in the sense that it has the potency to enter your room in a dream and shake you and terrify you and push you towards make a project like this. So it is a being with agency. And the way to approach this being, for me, as a performer, as a dance practitioner, has been through identification, through becoming, in order to understand the knowledge of the being and to understand another way of understanding the knowledge of the being. So in the process of creating these dances, I don't know if they are dances, these moments, it has been very important not to think about movement or dance as expression of the self, but to think about movement and dance that comes from the body of the mountain, from the body of the river, the body of the Menoko, which is this place in which water resources comes to the surface. And it has been also very important to understand my body and tanke people body, people's body, like runa kuna, people, as opposed to tira kuna, people, earth, as a body that has an ancestry that is not only people, that is an ancestry of people, earth. This is something that my indigenous teachers always said, and I didn't understand because, you know, we have been we have grown into this idea that we come from the apes and that there are these species and that we are kind of enclosed within the boundaries of our species. So no way our ancestors can be people, earth. Practically, and this is a knowledge from geology and from indigenous practice and ancestral knowledge, our bones are formed by the calc that runs in the water. And in the case of the water in the place I grew up and I became sort of adult bone structure, there was an ancient ocean, and this ocean was very fertile. It had a lot of life. It was like a soup of life. And when the ocean retires, and this is in Mapuche ancient history as well as in geology, all these remains of these creatures are pushed through the earth and become sedimentary rock. When the water surfaces, carries the calc of these rocks through the rivers and through our bodies, and by drinking this water, we acquire bones. And bones are not ready, are not finished. Actually, nothing is very much finished in the body, is being remade. This is also very interesting. It is becoming itself. So ancestry is not something that concerns only humans, now to use the term human. And this was a very interesting idea of sort of transforming the way I feel my body and understand myself as independent from other peoples, people, and people Earth. In relation to that, I see that we are maybe talking a bit about similar things through different lenses. It was important also for me in this project to think about bodies that have precedence, so that are in a temporality that is not the temporality of the line of modern colonial thought, which is a line that goes towards the future in a vertiginous way, the new to come. But thinking more about this idea of precedence, which is the way that First Nations in Abya understand time traditionally, and this is something that sort of is very common, I think, in very different cultures across the continent, is that the time is not a line, it is also not a circle or a spiral, because all of those would be drawings of time in space. And because time is not space, it would be proposed another type of temporality which doesn't want to become space. And here Rolando Vázquez, which is a decolonial scholar, explains it very well in English, so it's going to be very useful. He says, in the temporality of precedence, what is before us because it's before. So in a way that neutralizes the idea of the line and the idea of time as a space. So in order to think about this land as a land that is knowledgeable, that has agency, and that can teach us to make art, for example, or to make activism, or to survive in the pronostics of seeing the life and the places you love and the people you love in ruins, destroyed, de-earthed by this machine of extraction that fuels the global north of capital and resources, of living bodies that are then killed in order to become capital. I think it's very important to think through this idea of time. I tried to make all this work without the idea of hope, because I knew that the lobby of the company would be very strong. So even the permit was rejected. They appealed to the Council of Ministers and they managed to get through. So the project will happen now. Still, we are going to appeal to the Supreme Court, and there are many other steps to come, and we don't know what will happen. It could be that it doesn't happen because it's irrational. It's funny that the rational progress that we learn in school have become so irrational. But I try to think not from the perspective of hope. I really try, and people had difficulties with this. I said, like, no, it's not about hope. In the sense that happens or not happens, if all this effort of the activist, which is much larger than mine, I can do art, this is what I can do. If all this effort is lost, if we think of time through the perspective of precedence, what we have been doing is honoring the Apu, thus speaking through the Apu and acting the Apu through us, lending our body through the presence of the Apu. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We kind of ended up on time, but still, But still, if somebody here in the room, or maybe you want to ask one another.
I have questions, but if you don't.
Any question in the room? If you don't speak English, I can translate. If that shouldn't be an obstacle, please. Anybody?
I have a question. I was intrigued by something you said, Paz. When you said a question of aesthetics, that was something I was wondering, why is it a question for you of aesthetics to practice the dance in this temporality of the ruin and the temporality of the not yet future or the past of the future?
Well, because I guess it's the forgotten one, right? Or at least this is my sense. I want to advocate for, although this might sound a little bit New Age, the enchantment of things, and this is precisely the opposite of what you explained right now with the identification thing. How do you say? Being with agency has to do with identification, right?
I said to learn,
becoming,
to know through identification.
To know through
identification with a mountain, with a river, with a glacier. To know them through lending them your body.
Yeah. And I find it very funny actually because you gave the example of the apple.
Apple is a mountain.
The apple. I thought you were saying
I hope
the
somebody
apple.
understood.
And that was the example I also had prepared in order to explain a little bit how this transmission
I
thing
hope
works.
I was clear. An apple is not a mountain. It is an earth being that is very important in Andean cultures. So it's a people earth and not just a mountain or something.
Earth beings.
Earth being, yeah. People earth in Quechua, I like it a lot. So Tira Cuna is people earth, and Runa Cuna would be people like us. So it was not an apple, but we were lost in translation.
Yeah.
Maybe I can clarify why I made this question, because for me, aesthetics is not neutral. For me, aesthetics is already filled with modern colonial history. So I wanted to understand how you navigate this concept or this experience of aesthetics. Like, how do you explain?
For me, it's a question of, in respect to dance, I will say. So it's not about becoming. It's about assuming that things, the being of things, whatever they are withdrawn from whatever I can put upon them. So, in explaining the example of the apple, I'm transmitting an apple to you through touch. And what this apple is will be always different than appears to be, than what it seems, right? And more when we speak, because it's mediated through touch, so there you have a whole process. So the only thing I can transmit is not the apple itself, because I don't know what the apple is, right? I can only transmit it as a particular size, as a color, as a volume, as a kind of weight.
I find this very funny because I also don't know what the apple is. But, so in lending,
I mean, we can say linguistically there is food, right, and all that.
I mean apple.
But okay, are we understanding? I'm talking about an apple.
No. I know. But I was saying, like, in the same way, as you don't understand what the apple is, I also don't understand what the apple is, in the sense of when trying to know through identification. I mean, it's an impossible exercise because you cannot know how does it feel to be a mountain, a river, a glacier.
But me, I want to renounce to know what the apple is because I depart from the fact that I won't ever know what the apple is, right? So I prefer to, in any case, I don't know, maybe I'm really give or try to give agency to this apple existence, right? So from the perspective of white Western dance, I think, yes, we can say aesthetics is blah, 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 what you say, no? This modern, but this is my practice in respect to that, right? So it is something, right? I mean, and also, aesthetics also in regards to when we speak about a world's ending and this whole idea of worlding, what do we have? We have aesthetics. I mean, I think the aesthetic machine is the one first thing that we are forgotten, and probably we are forgetting here in the West. I don't know how in other parts of the world. And yes, I agree, maybe there is a reason, and the reason is because it's so filled with, yeah, maybe. But still, I want to advocate for aesthetics, or, which is different, the aesthetic experience, which is the encounter with something that says absolutely nothing about you. And it's a radical difference you are facing, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, if there are no questions in the audience, I would like to ask something. I don't know if, because also one of my areas of research has received now the name. I found myself super interested in the notion of mimesis, which I never was before, but that I have arrived to it in relation to many other issues. But one of my questions was related specifically to what you called identification. And for me, it is a very, very intriguing and interesting exercise. So I would like to ask you about how it happens. Because, of course, it does not work in the Western traditional understanding of imitation plus something else or so, but rather so mimesis and the kind of similitude that we can find between you and the mountain. It is not because of the outer shape of the mountain or but because I tend to think at the moment I am thinking that the results that we call similitude has nothing to do with visual properties, but rather with performative results of a relation that has. So I would like to know about this relation and how you think about it, and talk about it in general, because I am super interested in that. Like right now.
So I developed something I called prácticas ecosomáticas, but of course the term is a Greek term, so there might be many different prácticas ecosomáticas, but this one had a very kind of it is a useful thing. I was thinking in regards to this, which hurts me, the fact that, I'm going to lose a place that is full of memories and full of, like home, sensation of home. So in regards to that sort of grieving, I wanted to start understanding how this mountain, how it is to be a mountain, or how can I relate to others in another way. And in order to that, which is a very useful task, like it's a very practical thing, how can I acquire knowledge that would change my relation with others, which are people, earth? Forest and river, there is forest, there is river, there is this mountain and glaciers. And how I did it was I did it through touch and through something I call like ensoñación, dreaming-like state. And in this ensoñación and in this touch, there is an invocation part. a place is described. And this place holds other places, because actually almost everything holds others within. It's very interesting. There's this notion in biology, holobionts. So holobionts is like nurturing places that host other beings, and it's like fullness of others in relation. And for example, while I started to do this, I realized that the experience created certain knowledge that was different to information, and that was different to knowledge, like the knowledge that we are taught in school, in the university, in the academies, etc. For example, upon an experience, a person was asked to become, or to enseñar, or to learn, or to do this practice, in which and become a forest which was clear cut. The person after the experience explained that they had understood that they were only cut on the surface, but inside the earth they continue living. This is interesting. I would never think like that if I look at a clear-cut forest, because I would not think from the perspective of my body. So in a way, this type of embodiment allows a different type of knowledge which can change my relationship with these others, so that these others stop being stuff and become people earth, other bodies as mine, with intentionality, or with how my indigenous teacher says, everything has eyes, mouth, hands, and can speak. So it goes in that direction. And there are many examples like that. So it's not that science is arts or poetics, but it can inform a way of relation that is kind of very specific.
Okay, this house is closing, guys. So thank you for being here, but we have to continue outside at the bar. Thank you to the people watching. People, earth, people, organ, people, ear, people, waste, people, detritus, except people, we don't like that. Thank you very much, everyone.